Judges chapter 15 is where we are at, and we are continuing the story of Samson. And we've seen that Samson a couple of chapters ago. We saw his miraculous birth and all that happened. And we've seen some of his antics or his shenanigans over the last couple of chapters. And we see him today. And it really is such a strange story because we're trying to figure out if this guy is, what he doing, is it blessed by God? And is it not? Is it? And I mean, it was made clear to us. In fact, let me go back very quickly. And if you're in Judges chapter 15, you can go back if you would like. You don't have to. But in Judges chapter 15, it says in verse 5, as the angel was talking to his mother, predicting the birth of Samson, she said in Judges 13:5, the angel said in Judges 13:5, for behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head. As part of this vow that he was taking and he was going to be under, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. So that really was the purpose of his life, was that he was going to be a tool in the hand of God to begin to free the Israelites from the Philistines. So that was God's purpose for his life. However, we've seen already that Samson really does not seem interested in fulfilling his purpose. Now, this is a common topic or theme that I've talked about lots in here, and I mention it from time to time, I guess I should say, not lots, but and that is potential. And there is, all of us have potential, and there is reached potential and unreached potential. And reached potential is when you are doing all, to the best of your ability, doing all to reach your full potential, all that you can accomplish. And then there is unreached potential, which is most often it's not reached because the individual is not giving any effort to do, to really accomplish anything. And that seems to be where Samson's at. It's like he's been told, or at least it was prophesied over his life, and no doubt his mom and dad told him that, hey, the angel spoke to us, and God, we saw God, and he said that you're going to begin to deliver Israel. But he does not seem interested in doing that. And the same thing can certainly be true of us. Now, I did not grow up in a Christian home. It wasn't until I was in high school that my dad came home saying that he had gotten saved. So I was not brought up in it, like many of you have been. Maybe this is your first exposure right now to Christianity, but my assumption is that the majority of you in this room, you've been raised in Christianity, a Christian home, or at least a home that claims to know Christ or to be Christians. And so you've had some, you've been associated with, you're familiar with it. Many of you may have grown up in church, maybe even in revival. And so you've been around it all of your life, and you know better than I do, because I don't know your heart, you know your heart, but you know if you have a desire, if you're following or chasing after the Lord, some of those terms that I use, following hard after the Lord, or if you've become bored with the Lord and you just think, you know what, I've been born into this stuff, it really wasn't my choice, and it's just, my family making me do it. That seems to be what is on Samson's heart. We're not really told what his thoughts are about his life, but we're seeing what his thoughts are about his life in his actions, the way that he's living. And it opens up here, Judges chapter 15 opens up with, where we left off in chapter 14, and that is with the wife that he had, which even that was sketchy. It's like, he's marrying this woman, does he like her, does he not like her? It's so hard to figure out. But through it all, what we see is that God is still working. And it's a reminder that even with imperfect vessels, that God can still work and accomplish his purpose. Now, if you are a note taker, but even if you are not, If you are a note taker, I've got some notes up here, but if you're not, hopefully this will help to keep you somewhat organized as we go through this chapter. The first section in verses 1 to 8, it's really kind of happens in two chunks or two episodes here, and one has to do with fiery foxes, and the second one has to do with a fresh jawbone. Staying true to staying true to Judges, and all of the strangeness that happens throughout the book and through all these episodes. And so we pick it up in the first section. We're going to pick it up verses 1 to 8. Let's see if we can get there. There we are, verses 1 to 8. And we see in verses 1 to 2 that it starts with, I can't tell, receiving bad news in verses 1 and 2. So it says that after a while, in the time of wheat harvest, when the wheat is being harvested, so you're getting into the end of summer and into the fall, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. Now, that's not just some weird Hollywood movie where the guy shows up and for some reason he's got a pet goat with him. That's not the idea. He's brought a goat in order to kill it and eat it. The idea is let's celebrate. I'm here to celebrate our relationship, our marriage, our relationship. And so he shows up and he says in verse 1, let me go. Now he's talking to his wife's father, his father-in-law. And he says, let me go into my wife, into her room. So let me go see my wife. At the end of verse 2, but her father would not permit him to go in. Now he tells us why in verse 2. Her father said, I really thought that you thoroughly hated her. So we'll stop there for a moment. Why did the father really think that Samson thoroughly hated her? Well, I am not there to see all of the minute details, but certainly what we know from Judges chapter 14, I'm not surprised that the father of his wife would say, hey, I thought you hated her, And what he does is he ends up giving her away. He gives his daughter away to another man. He figured, I guess that Samson really does, hate my daughter, and I want my daughter to be married, and so I'm giving my daughter now. Since he's gone, Samson had skipped town. So I guess I'm free to give her away, and he does that. Now again, I'm not there to know all the ins and outs, but certainly Samson has some part to play in receiving the blame. It was such a strange episode back in Judges chapter 14 when he left. He went and killed some people and took their clothes because he had made a bet, and he gives them to them, and then he takes off and he just seems to be angry and forget my wife. I mean, it's a strange episode. But he receives this bad news, and it says in verse 2, her father said, I really thought that you thoroughly hated her, therefore I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please, take her instead. Now, there are some little comments and phrases in here, things that will alert you and I, give us a clue, it'll clue us in to what kind of crowd this is. Now, I want to say that, oh man, look at these weird Philistines. But Samson, who's an Israelite, he's right there with them. He's just all tangled up in this mess and really conducting himself in such a strange way also. So the Philistines, but what I'm getting at is that everybody involved in this, Samson, the Philistine, who's going to begin to deliver, he's going to be used by God. We read that back in chapter 13. He's going to be used by God to begin to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. I mean, this is the one that God has chosen to use to help his people out. And yet he's all mixed up in all of this weirdness. And here we find at the end of verse 2, here, listen to what the dad said. Young ladies, I want you to put yourself in Samson's wife's position. So you get married to this guy, and then he splits. He takes off. And you're like, I don't really know if he likes me or doesn't like me. And Dad says, look, I think he hates you. What a nice thing to say. I think he hates you. So let's give you to his companion. Okay, young ladies? And then your husband shows back up several months later. And he shows up with a goat. And he says, I'm here to see my wife. And then you're listening at the door like, what are they talking about? Samson's back. And you hear your dad say, hey, I thought you hated her. So I gave her away to your buddy. But look at her younger sister, my younger daughter. Isn't she better than her anyways? I mean, what would that do to your heart, to your mind? How would that make you feel? Obviously, you would think, goodness, like a couple of things. What, am I just a piece of property here? And even my own dad likes my younger sister better? And he has no problem just, is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead. And then what about the younger daughter? Let's say you're the younger daughter and you're not married yet. And your sister's husband shows up. And you're listening as the younger sister, man, what's going to happen? Trying to get all the juicy details. And then you hear your dad say, oh no, she's married to another guy already. But hey, how about that younger sister of hers? She's better than her older sister anyways. You can take her. What? What's going on? But this is part of the strangeness, the weirdness of this time. This is how the people are. This is their mindset. These are the things that they're thinking. And I got to tell you that it's no different from the time that you and I are living in right now. And all of the strangeness that we see going on. And the different ideas and thoughts. And why do people have such radically different thoughts? As you and I are showing up on a Sunday and a Wednesday and we're reading the Bible and we're going, okay, well, this is crazy, but here's what God says, and that sounds good to me. But then we're looking at our world and going, wait, what? Sister wives, we got TV shows about, about some guy being married to multiple women. I mean, we've got TV shows about that right now. We've got, all these, it's not just strangeness that's going on around us, but we've got TV shows promoting it, talking about it, like, hey, this is totally normal. Do this stuff. And why is that? Why was it going on in Judges, and why is this stuff going on now? It is because of the absence of God. So we push God out, then that gets filled up with anything and everything. Let's just get as weird as we can. Because see, what happens is when we push God out and His Word, we go, you know what, we don't want Him in society. Then you know what happens? We no longer have a standard. There's no standard for morality. What's the standard? If we push God out, I mean, in here we've got, in the Old Testament, we've got His Old Testament law, so we see, what He desires, what He likes, what He doesn't like, what He says is sin, and so we've got some basis, and we go, okay, I guess, here's what God's Word says, so okay, I've got a basis. But when we get rid of Him, then what? Then we've got to come up with our own basis. Right? We've got to come up with our own basis. And Santi's basis, if we don't have God, Santi's basis, that might be different from Destiny's. Maybe Destiny's got a different one. Maybe Zach's got his own. Maybe Joab's got his own, and it's different from Jose's. Maybe Koa's is different. And so you have, everybody's just kind of like, well, I don't know, I think this is right, well, I think this is right, well, I think this is right. You got no basis, there's nothing. And that's the same thing that we see in our society now. We're actively, as quickly as we can, generally speaking, just society as a whole, we're pushing God out, so there's no more basis. So, if you think you're a dog, then you're a dog. But if you want to marry 3 guys, marry 3 guys. We just start making up our own rules because we pushed out the standard. And that's what's going on here in Judges. All this weirdness. Because because they're pushing God out. It's like God's not invited. So he receives this bad news. What is the response? Let's look at the response in the remaining verses here. In verses 3 to 8, we see retaliation. What does it say here? Beginning in verse 3, it says, "And Samson said to them," in verse 3, "This time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them." Okay? Nobody can blame me. Then Samson, in verse 4, went and caught 300 foxes. My assumption is he did not catch them all at once. Different times. He took torches, turned the foxes tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of tails. So evidently he caught these foxes. However he caught them, we do not know, but he took their tails and he tied those together somehow with whatever he was using to tie them together. And then he made some kind of torch and tied the torch also. Right, guys? Right? And he tied the torch to the tails, set the tails on fire. Look what it says in verse 5. When he had set the torches on fire, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever come into contact with a fox. Anybody in here ever come into contact with a fox? And I mean, I'm not talking about. Well, I saw one time on on a TV show. You're familiar with the fox. Now, you probably know this. If you don't know this, you're about to find out. Foxes, they look really cool. I'll even use the word cute. Look cute. But if they look cute as they're scampering across through the woods or across your your campsite or across your yard maybe. But when they're trapped, they become vicious, ferocious. Now, I have never trapped a fox. However, I had some good friends who they live near, or they used to live near the foothills over in the San Bernardino area, and they one time had a family of foxes that had gotten into their attic, their crawl space, and how it happened I have no idea, and then some of the babies had actually gotten into the walls, and so they had to cut a hole in the wall and trap the foxes, and then take them and have them taken somewhere else. But they were explaining to me how these things were just absolutely ferocious, man. Cute little foxes, and but once you got them into the cage, they would just go berserk. And I get it; they were scared. I get it, but they would go absolutely berserk. So it wasn't like, oh, look at this cute little fox. Let's just pick it up and I'll take it to school for show and tell. It wasn't like that at all. It was terrifying. And so this is extraordinary. It's fascinating. It's weird. It's all of those things. And again, we do not have all the little minute details, so I do not know exactly how he caught them or how did he. I'm thinking from the little bit that I know about foxes, like how did he get them in a spot where he could tie their tails without them going. But however he did it, I do not know. But he takes these things, ties them together, puts a torch, and then sets them, throws them out into the fields. And what does it say in verse 5? They burned up both the shocks and the standing grain. That means that what that is talking about, it just burned everything to the ground, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. So in this retaliation, we see here, we're going to see this, 3 different things. Samson against the Philistines. So he attacks the Philistines. Okay? But then, in verse 6, then the Philistines said, "Who has done this?" And they answered, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite." Now, what is a Timnite? Timnite. Is that like the Dark Knight? Is that like what is that like? What is that? A Timnite is somebody that would have been. It was a person. It was Samson's wife's dad. So Samson's father-in-law. And look what happens. Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion. So they find out. They go, oh, it was so Samson who burned all of our food. And why did he do that? He did that because he showed up to get his wife, and his wife had been given away. So he went berserk, and he burned all of our food in a really strange way. Well, then it says, at the end of verse 6, so the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. So the Philistines, they show up, and in order to get back at Samson, in fact, here's what I called that there in verse 6. So the retaliation is still going on. Okay, so he received the bad news. He retaliates. Fiery foxes. Then they retaliate in verse 6 by going to her house, Samson's wife's house, who, by the way, is no longer his wife. She's not somebody else's wife. It's like, what's all this strangeness? Again, it's all this weirdness. So they go to her house, and sounds like they burn Samson's wife and her dad. They burn them to death. That's what that means. Now they had, I don't know if you remember, but in the previous chapter, when Samson and this woman were having, they were celebrating their wedding, and everybody's together, and Samson had said, hey, listen, I'll make a bet with you, and they couldn't figure out the riddle that he gave, and so they show up they're at her wedding party, and they tell her, hey, you better find out from your husband what the answer to the riddle is. If you don't, we're going to burn you and your dad. So the point that I'm making is this is the environment that they're living in. This is how these people are operating. Like, we're the same people. We're friends. We're neighbors. We're countrymen. Whatever. But if you do something I don't like, I'm going to kill you. And then you have Samson, who took off and left his wife, and then he comes back several months later looking for her, and the whole thing is so bizarre. But why is it bizarre? Because you and I have enough biblical sense to go, you know what? I'm pretty sure that a marriage is not supposed to be like this. I'm pretty sure that in a marriage, people shouldn't be getting burned to death and fiery foxes, and I don't think that the husband should leave for several months and then come. Just not because I'm not talking about military or something like that. Some reason that he leaves, but he just got mad and left, and then come back several months looking for her with a young goat. This is all so bizarre, but that's because you and I have some understanding that of what the Bible teaches, and that is that husband and wife are supposed to love one another, supposed to live with one another, they're supposed to serve one another. This relationship is certainly not normal. And if you come from a dysfunctional family, that is a term that's very common to all of us, and no doubt there are some of you in here who don't have a normal Christian family. You go, man, I'm from a dysfunctional family, and it's whatever's going on, whatever's happening, but you're understanding that, this seems dysfunctional to me, and you go, I would say, welcome to the club. Whose family is not dysfunctional, by the way, just at different levels, but this is dysfunctional. This is dysfunctional behavior. This is strange. This is bizarre, and that's why we have it in the Bible, and that's why it's in the book of Judges, so that you and I can look at it and study it and go, man, this is really strange. I really don't want to live this way. That's what's happening here. Now, in the process of all of this weirdness, God is still using Samson. So, again in verse 6, the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire, so they killed their own countrymen. And then finally in verses 7 and 8, we read this, maybe, there we are. Go back, see? Why does it do that? That's crazy. Samson against the Philistines. So, he receives the bad news. Then there's retaliation. Samson against the Philistines. And then the Philistines against Samson, because we're going to get that guy back. And now Samson against the Philistines again in verses 7 and 8. Samson said to them, since you would do a thing like this, I will surely take revenge on you. And after that, I will cease. So he attacked them hip and thigh. That is a term that means he went hard. So he attacked them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. We do not know how. Did he have a sword? Did he have an AK-47? Did he have a tank? What did he have? We don't know. And then he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Etam. So now he retaliates. So we're going to see what happens next. But let me remind you of something that I told you, I believe a couple of Sundays ago, and that is that every time we see Samson, he's alone. Remember me talking about that? How he's a bad boy. He's a loner. And there's something about that is appealing to some of us. We go, oh man, he blazes his own trail. Literally, he did that with the foxes, but he just does his own thing, man. He doesn't follow the rules. And now here he is again. Look at this in verse 8. It's a small thing, but it indicates something for us. Then he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Etam. What does that mean? It means that he just went and found a cleft, a space in the rock of Etam. He's just out there, just living on his own. Like Nacho Libre, living out there, just, a few steps from the village, He's just out there. Now, again, for some of us, we go, oh man, that's just really cool, man. I don't like people. I just want to go live out, in the wilderness, in the desert, in the forest, or I just want to live, I don't want to be around anybody. And look, I get it. People are weird. Sometimes they're hard to get along with. I get it. I understand that, and I'm one of those people that sometimes is just hard to get along with. I get it. Not everybody likes me. I get it. And there are some of us who just go, you know what? I don't want to be part of society anymore. I just want to leave. And here is Samson doing just that. He goes down. He lives in the cleft of the rock of Etam. So that's how he's living now. Just out there by himself in a cleft of a rock. Now, this brings us to our next section, beginning in verse 9. If we can get there, there we are, and that is the fresh jawbone. What? So we're going from fiery foxes to a fresh jawbone? Well, what is this all about? Let's find out. Now, and the story just continues, okay? Now the Philistines went up and camped in Judah and deployed themselves against Lehi. Now, why are they there? There we are, because they are searching for Samson in verses 9 through 13. Searching for Samson. So it says here, now the Philistines went up and camped in Judah. So that's not their own territory. So they're going into the Israelites' territory. And they deployed themselves. In other words, they set themselves out against Lehi, against Lehi. So they go into that area is what it says. And the men of Judah, of that area, the Israelites, verse 10, they said, why have you come up against us? So the Israelites go out to the Philistines. They see the Philistines come in. Now, do not forget that the Philistines are ruling over the Israelites at this time. So they go, hey, man, like, why are you in our territory? Like, is something wrong? What's the problem? And here's what happens in verse 10. So they answered, the Philistines, they answered, we have come up to arrest Samson. to do to him as he has done to us. So we're going to torture him, we're going to kill him, is essentially what they're saying. So we're looking for Samson. So they're searching for Samson, verses 9 to 13. Now verse 11 says, then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam. So somebody finds out where Samson's at. And they said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is this you have done to us? So they're going, why would you bring the Philistines? The Philistines are oppressing us. Why would you bring them here? Why would you bring those colonizers? No, I'm just kidding. The Philistines. Why would you bring the Philistines here? Why would you do that to us? Well, at the end of verse 11, he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. So he says, man, we've been fighting back and forth. Let me tell you what they did to me. So then I did this to them. Then they came back at me. Then I went back at them. And it's just been back and forth in retaliation. But they said to him in verse 12, these are his own countrymen, the Israelites. We have come down to arrest you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. Now, why are they willing to arrest Samson? He's an Israelite, just like them. And he is supposed to be their deliverer. Why are they willing to arrest him and give him to their enemies, the Philistines? Well, that is because we may presume that they're not really friends with Samson. So, I mean, they're not willing to fight for him or lay their lives down for him. So they're kind of like, who is this clown? I mean, we know who he is, but, let's get this guy out of here, because they're afraid of the Philistines. The Philistines are, if they harbor, if they keep or protect Samson, then the Philistines are going to come after them. So as far as they know, it's in their best interest to arrest this guy and to send him off to the Philistines. So that's, in fact, what they do. So it says in verse 12, but they said to him, we have come down to arrest you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. Then Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves. So Samson seems to be saying, hey, it's okay if you arrest me, but just promise me you're not going to kill me. In verse 13, they spoke to him, saying, no, but we will tie you securely and deliver you into their hand, but we will surely not kill you. Evidently, he believed them. So it says at the end of verse 13, and they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. So again, he's living down there in this cleft, in this space, and they tie him up with new ropes. Now, why does it say new ropes? The idea is that these are new ropes that are not going to break easily. Okay? They're not crusty old ropes that, your grandpa had just, in the garage for 40 years. These are brand new ropes. So they tie him up. Now, beginning of verse 14, we see the slaughter of 1,000 men. I'm just having so much trouble with this. Seth, could you do me a favor and click the next button for us? Slaughtering 1,000 men. Verse 14. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting against him. So as the other Israelites from Judah, they're bringing him over to the Philistines see that, they come shouting at him, running at him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. Now, it should be noted that this is the first time we're reading that phrase in this chapter. So, the way that he was living and acting before, we could make the argument that behavior that he had before, that was not from the Lord, man. Because we never read. There's no evidence that the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him and he caught foxes and did all that. We never saw that. However, we do see it here. So this we can be sure of. We go, no, this is from the Lord. Verse 14. Then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. So he's tied up with new ropes. He's being led by his own countrymen. The Philistines see him and they go, yeah, here he comes, we got him. And it says in verse 14, then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire, and his hands broke loose. I'm sorry, and his bonds broke loose from his hands. So as he's tied up, all of a sudden the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, and those new ropes, because the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, they became like flax that's burned. In other words, very thin material, it's burned and just disintegrates, and all of a sudden, boom, his hands are free. So in verse 15, he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out his hand and took it, and killed 1,000 men with it. Now again, we go, what? Come on. But here's the difference, is the phrase we just read, and that is that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. So how does someone just do things like that? Well, they don't just do things like that. This is something miraculous that's happening. This is something that's from the Lord. What happened earlier with the foxes and all the weird stuff, I don't really know. I mean, he's just taking revenge. But here we know beyond the shadow of a doubt, because we're told here that the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. And when the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, then he was able to do things like kill 1,000 men with the fresh jawbone of a donkey, which sounds really gross to me. Fresh jawbone? Does that mean it still had stuff on it? You know, I wouldn't want to. I would be like, can I have a glove first? You know, I don't know what condition it really was in, but we see that it was a fresh jawbone of a donkey. And so he says in verse 16, he kills 1,000 men, and then he's like, you know what? Let me just say something poetic. Verse 16. Then Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. So he just kind of, rattles off this little, haiku or this little poem or something. He's like, I'm inspired, And, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, what does that mean? It means heaps upon heaps of dead bodies, 1,000 guys. And with the jawbone of a donkey, I've slain 1,000 men, 1,000 Philistines. And so it was in verse 17, when he had finished speaking, that he threw the jawbone from his hand and called that place Ramath Lehi, which means jawbone height. So this is the place where where Samson used the jawbone to kill 1,000 guys. And then finally in verses 18 through 20, we see that the Lord is supplying water. There it is in verses 18 to 20. Then he became very thirsty, because that's what happens when you kill 1,000 guys with a fresh jawbone. You get really thirsty. Then he became very thirsty, so he cried out to the Lord. Now, as he said this, I want you to consider, what does this sound like? We do not have the tone of his voice. All we have is the structure of the sentence here, so we're not completely sure. But it sure does sound to me like the guy's got a bad attitude, is what it sounds like to me. Then he became very thirsty, so he cried out to the Lord and said, you have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. So I love this. He acknowledges that what just happened with the fresh jawbone, he acknowledges that it is from the Lord. Right? That's what he's saying here in verse 18 as he's talking to the Lord. You have given this great deliverance. This is not normal. Samson knows that. This is not normal. God, you have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. He's talking about himself. He's God's servant. And now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised? So that's the part right there. Now, is it possible to dehydrate and die? It absolutely is. Yeah, it's absolutely possible. Was Samson at that point? That I do not know. Again, I'm not there. I do not know what his, if he was dehydrated or not. No doubt he was thirsty. How long does it take to kill 1,000 men with a jawbone? I don't know. But it sounds, it's got this air of whininess to it, complaining, and I dare say, drama. And that is because he starts out by saying, midway, You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. That's good. God, you did this incredible thing. And now shall I die of thirst? Now, the only reason I say, maybe he is. Maybe he's on the verge of dying. Maybe he is. But it sure does remind me of me being, I actually used to be young. I wasn't born this age. I used to be young. And a summertime, I'd be a little guy, I'd be outside, we'd be playing football or playing with our Hot Wheels or baseball in the street or whatever it was that we were doing, running around, riding our bikes, BMX bikes, I had a really cool red line that I bought when I was in junior high. And, it'd just be out like all summer, whatever. And then you come in and like, Ma, all dry, like, I'm dying of thirst. And then you do something like, I'm dying of thirst. I need some Kool-Aid. Really? You need a container full of sugar, huh? That's what you need because you're dying of thirst, It's like, get some water, and get some water and don't get it out of the sink. Go outside and drink it out of the water hose. And we would do that all the time, just drink it right out of the water hose. But, it just reminds me of that. And what I'm doing is I'm telling you that I was pretty dramatic. I'm dying of thirst. We'll use that phrase all the time. Oh, I'm dying of thirst. Or I'm dying of hunger. I'm going to starve to death. Really? You just had Chick-fil-A like 2 hours ago. Really? Now all of a sudden you're dying of hunger. Now you're going to die. Really? Okay. I think I'm going to die having to pay all this money for you, all this food that you're eating. That's the dad's response when my kids would say, oh, I'm dying of hunger. Let me see. I don't think you're dying of hunger. I don't think so. Yeah, I think you can go a little while longer without some more food. But that's what it sounds like to me. He seems to start out, well, you've given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, but now I'm dying of thirst, and I'm going to fall into the hand of the uncircumcised. And in case you're unfamiliar with that word uncircumcised, that's a derogatory term. The Israelites would be circumcised, which is a minor surgery performed on guys only. Okay? And so anybody else was uncircumcised. So he's saying, now what are you're just going to let me die just like the rest of these uncircumcised people, and then they're just going to come and capture me? Really? That's what you want, God? So he seems to be complaining. But look at this. Now, remember, I don't have it up. Of course, it's way back at the beginning. Remember what we're doing in Judges. We're seeing the faithlessness of mankind's failures. But we're contrasting that each time with the faithfulness of God. So the faithlessness of mankind and the faithfulness of God. Now here's this guy who seems to be complaining, but God did cause his Holy Spirit to come upon him. We just read that a few minutes ago. And now here is God's goodness again in verse 19. So God split the hollow place that is in Lehi. So there's some area there in Lehi, in this area. And Lehi, remind you, means jawbone. And water came out. That's what we call a miracle. And he drank, and his spirit returned, small s, spirit. That means his attitude, his strength. He was revived. And he revived. Therefore, he, Samson, called its name En Hakor, spring of the caller. So he called out to the Lord, and the Lord gave him water. So he named it Spring of the Caller, which is in Lehi to this day. And to this day means to the time of this writing. Whether it's still there or whatever, who knows. But verse 20, we finish. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So you have this overlapping where we've already found out that the Philistines, they were ruling over them for 40 years, but Samson, for a portion of some of this time, he's judging for 20 years. Now it sounds like we're all done with him, but we're not done with him yet. We still have more madness, the madness of Samson, which we'll get to in the future. But here's how we're going to finish. I want to talk to you about potential, about fulfilled potential and unfulfilled potential. I think we can all agree, we read it plainly, that God is using here in this chapter, he's used Samson. Yes? Would you agree with that? God used Samson? Yeah, he certainly did. We read there that the Holy Spirit came upon him. So yeah, that would mean that God blessed him and used him. So God's using this imperfect individual. That's great news for you and I, because you and I are imperfect, but it means that God can use us. And he certainly used Samson. And he'll continue to use Samson. But here's the question. Question is, yeah, God can use an imperfect vessel like me, an imperfect person. And he does that with Samson. We're seeing what God can do with an individual who is not obedient to God. He's not completely surrendered to God. He does his own thing. And then God occasionally uses him. Imagine what God could do, or could have done, if Samson had been completely obedient to the Lord. And we have to ask ourselves the same question as we close. Yes, God can use us. We're imperfect people. We have issues, we got problems, weirdness, all the things. Dysfunctional, whatever, all the different things. But God can use us still. That's great news. But what could God do? What all could God accomplish if I would fully surrender myself to him? Maybe I partially surrender myself to him and he uses me. And what will happen is when we do that, if we're living in sin, but God still uses us, we start to fool ourselves. Like, well, you know what? I guess maybe it's not that big a deal. God doesn't really care about my sin. Well, God does care about sin. We know that from the Bible. But, yeah, he can still use you. But imagine if you surrendered yourself completely to the Lord. So God's doing a great thing. Imagine if you gave all of yourself to him, what more he could do. So where do I want to find myself? Well, man, I don't want to be partly surrendered to the Lord. I want to be fully surrendered to the Lord. I want God to use me, but I want God to use all of me as much as he possibly can to accomplish all that he wants to accomplish. Not just part, not just some, not even most, but all. So what you and I want to do is we want to strive to fully surrender ourselves to the Lord and say, God, just take all of me. Not part of me, not some of me, not most of me. Not just the good things, just take it all, Lord, and change me and use me to the fullest, so that when I die and leave this earth, there's nothing left. I don't want to leave anything. I don't want it to be said that, oh, you know what, man, God really used him, but God could have used him so much more if he had only surrendered himself to the Lord. What I want to do is when I leave here, I just want to be, that's it, I didn't leave anything, man. It's all done. It's like some of you are athletes and you hear people say, leave it all on the field, leave it all on the court. That's the idea. Leave it all on the field, leave it all on the court. Give yourself completely to the Lord. Let him use all of you. He's already got a plan. Ephesians 2:10 tells us that he's got good works that he prepared beforehand that we should accomplish, that we should do. Let's let him do that. Let's let him do all that he wants to do. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this morning, and thank you for your word.